Hello, fellow educators. Welcome to the Classroom Behaviour Solutions podcast, the podcast that gives you weekly scientifically grounded and evidence-based solutions to your behaviour dilemmas, providing a blueprint to developing flexible behaviour solutions that really work for your individual pupils, classes, or even whole school environments. If you're a teacher, a Senko, or even a school leader with a passion for supporting pupil behaviour in a way that is positive and effective, this podcast is for you. My name is Adam Dean, and I'm your host. Hi everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Classroom Behaviour Solutions with me, Adam Dean. This week I'm going to talk about behaviour contracts. And actually, rather than the usual free-flow style, I'm going to be reading directly from a chapter of my own book, Supporting Behaviour with Science, Classroom Behaviour, which is a book that I self-published a number of years ago on amazon.co.uk. So if it's something that you listen to and it sounds like something you're interested in purchasing yourself, it's called Supporting Behaviour with Science, Classroom Behaviour, and for a couple of episodes I'm going to read one or two chapters out. So this week I'm going to read Behaviour Contracts. I want to say that I wrote this about 3 or 4 years ago now, and some things have changed. And the first thing I'm going to say is that if you have a whole class behaviour contract, you do need to be very careful about how that affects individuals, and maybe we'll take a little break to discuss that at some point in in the episode. So, behaviour contracts. Behaviour contracts could be your key tool in managing and supporting class behaviour. They can be incredibly powerful tools, or, done wrong, they can be worthless and frustrating. Many of you have probably already used behaviour contracts in the past. However, you have probably not seen a truly effective behaviour contract like the one we are about to build together. What is a behaviour contract? Put simply, a behaviour contract is a written document which specifies very clearly the expected behaviours of an individual or group of individuals and what the consequence will be when that behaviour occurs or does not occur. The document should clearly spell out exactly what is expected and what will happen afterwards. So, a standard behaviour contract from a primary school setting might look something like this. Class X behaviour contract. Class X promises to use kind hands, do their work, listen to the teacher when she is talking, be kind to our friends, use nice words. This probably looks familiar. The problem is that although these contracts do set out expectations, they are rarely as effective as they could be. We all have contracts of employment. Imagine for a moment if yours was laid out as below. Mrs. Y's contract with primary school A. Mrs. Y promises to come to school every day, teach the children in her class, be nice to her colleagues. Now, this would give no clear idea of what was expected of you, and crucially, it doesn't explain what your employer's part of the contract is. Now we're going to go through the process of writing an effective and robust behaviour contract that will work. Consultation. Clearly, everyone who is affected by the contract should be involved in putting it together. You will need to fine-tune elements after the class has made initial suggestions, but if you don't involve them at all, you're at risk of A. Making them resent and even rebel against the contract, B. Causing apathy about the contract and a lack of engagement. You should have an initial discussion with your class about the contract, including what behaviours should be in there and what consequences will follow. Behaviours. If it is a generalised beginning of the year type contract, then you can start by just asking your class what they think is important. If this is the case, your rules might look similar to those outlined previously. That's fine. You can refine these in a little while. If, on the other hand, you're choosing to focus on something specific, then your discussion might be around a concern that you have and how to address it as a team. This is adaptable for all ages. If you have a class of 16-year-old streetwise teenagers, then discuss this with them like young adults. If you work with 4-year-olds, then you need to make the conversation appropriate to them. Adapt the process to your group. the same as you would any other activity. I've been involved with such systems with all kinds of pupil types, so I promise it can work. At this point, you should have a list of rules, either to do with a general classroom behaviour or focused on a specific area. These behaviours will need to be modified quite a bit further down the line. Consequences. Now, let's look at your part of the contract. A contract is an agreement between two parties, not just a list of rules. So what needs to be decided here is what happens when the behaviours occur or don't occur. The initial discussion should be with your class and then perfected by you later on. You need to specify what rewards will be applied when the pupils meet or do not meet their part of the contract. Some possible ideas of rewards might be extra break time, free time, tokens on a class token board, some time watching a film, listening to a story, a fun game. The reward itself doesn't really matter. The key is that it's effective. Now, coming away from the book here, what I should have written is that we're looking for a reinforcement, but obviously we don't know that it's a reinforcement until we find out if it's effective. So when I say here in the book, the key is that it's effective, what I really mean is the key is that it is actually reinforcement, which we won't know until we know that it's effective. Back to the book. Summary so far. So far, we've gone from a list of behaviours to a list of behaviours with associated rewards. Class X will listen when the teacher is talking has become Class X will listen when the teacher is talking, and Mrs. Z will give them an additional 5 minutes of break time. Already this is much more effective, but we will need to get more specific for this to become an effective contract. Making the contract specific. The next step in this process is to specify more clearly what is expected from both parties. To start with, we will need to take out any ambiguous phrases. For example, it will be good is just a clear no. Nobody can even be... For example, will be good, i.e. that's the expectation of the pupil, is a clear no. Nobody can even begin to specify what this means without a philosophy degree. If I asked you to be good, would you know what that actually looked like on a day-to-day basis? It's very subjective. Use kind hands is another common phrase that can cause confusion with its generality. What exactly are kind hands? Is this the absence of something specific, such as hitting or punching? Or are we trying to avoid touching at all levels? With such behaviours, we need to give a more specific example of what the behaviour does and does not mean. So, use kind hands could become, we do not touch our friends unless it is a handshake or a high five. This is a description of kind hands that even a very young pupil would understand. Hopefully you see where I'm going with this now. Next, we need to specify the timings involved. For example, as opposed to Class X will work hard, we need something that looks like Class X will work quietly for the whole of the lesson, or Class X will complete all their work in each lesson for a day. At this point, we will need to have a list of clearly definable specific behaviours. This will include exactly what is expected of your class and for how long. Now, you must do the same with your part of the deal at this point. You should specify exactly what you will do/provide when the pupils meet their part of the agreement. So if you're agreeing that they will gain 5 minutes extra play time, for example, then you should have a statement that looks like this. Class X agreed to do Y behaviours for A amount of time. If Class X do Y, then Mrs. Z agrees that Class X will be provided with an extra 5 minutes playtime. Let's look at some examples. Below is a simple behaviour contract between a teacher and a Year 11 class. Behaviour contract between Mr. F and 11G. 11G agreed to complete all work tasks by the end of the lesson period, ask for support if needed, avoid verbally or physically bothering classmates, listen when Mr. F is talking, keep conversations on the topic of work being completed. If 11G meet the above standards for 50 minutes of the work session, with 3 or less exceptions, then Mr. F will give them the final 10 minutes of the session for social time in the classroom. Signed. So this contract outlines the behaviours expected and the amount of time they are expected for. It also provides for the class to error up to 3 times during the session, so they can get it wrong 3 times. The teacher knows it is unlikely that the whole class will stick to this contract in its entirety, so this error proviso leaves a gap for a small amount of leniency and the ability for the teacher to stay consistent while being slightly lenient. There is also the proviso that the social time will take place in the classroom, which eliminates any disagreements on the topic. Below is another class contract designed for a younger class. Monkey class contract. Monkey class will put their hands up to ask questions, finish their work, ask for help when they need it, say please and thank you, not use rude words. Every time Monkey class follow their rules for 10 minutes, they get a tick on the board. 10 ticks equals 10 minutes outside play. Yay, Monkey class, smiley face. Apart from the language being simplified and the addition of a couple of graphics, which you can't see because I'm reading this, to jazz things up, a little, this contract does a very similar job. You might notice this contract also specifies a token economy system, which we're going to look at later. The use of the tokens means that these younger pupils will be receiving more regular reinforcement in the form of ticks, which will make the contract more effective. The impact of a good behaviour system. Mr. Brown is a Year 5 teacher working with a class of 32 pupils. The class is unengaged and around 50% of the class are being disruptive on a regular basis. Very little work is getting done daily. The pupils who want to engage with work are getting upset and several parental complaints are made. Mr. Brown decides to draw up a class contract. He writes the following. Class 5 agreed to the following rules. We will listen nicely to Mr. Brown when he is talking. We will be kind to our friends. We will try to complete the work Mr. Brown gives us on time. We will work hard. We will put our hands up to ask a question. Mr. Brown adds, if Class 6 follows this contract for the rest of the term, Mr. Brown will take them on a trip, thus including a reward at the end of the contract, which the class might be motivated to work towards. Unfortunately, after a week of working with the contract, no real progress has been made. Mr. Brown finds it very difficult to enforce this contract. After one day of some of the children not following the rules, it seems like he should withdraw the reward because the contract states they need to follow the contract fully to earn it. On the other hand, it occurs to him that if he does this, the pupils will have nothing to work for. He also realizes that if he doesn't follow through with this, he will seem inconsistent. Mr. Brown takes some time the following day to sit down with his class and discuss their behaviour. He explains that he wants to help them to learn and asks for suggestions for behaviours that would help them to learn, as well as rewards they would like to work towards. He allows them 30 minutes on the class laptops to research a trip within a given budget, and then has the class vote on the trip they would most like to go on. Most of the class are very excited by this idea. After the class meeting, Mr. Brown puts together the following contract. We will listen to Mr. Brown when he is speaking. This means we will look at Mr. Brown, we will not fiddle, and we will not speak to each other. We will only use encouraging statements like well done or good work when we talk about our friends' work. We will not touch our friends unless it is a high five or a handshake. We will try to complete work Mr. Brown gives us on time. If we get stuck, we can put up our hands and ask for Mr. Brown to help. Mr. Brown will work with us when we are stuck. We will put our hands up and ask a question, and we will not call out. For every half an hour that we follow these rules, Mr. Brown will put a marble in a glass marble jar. If we collect 50 marbles before the 6th of July 2018, then we will have a trip to the cinema to see the new Incredibles movie. If we collect 60, we can all have popcorn, and if we collect 70, we can have pick and mix. If we follow these rules for a whole morning, we'll get an extra 5 minutes playtime, and if we follow them for an afternoon, we can have a 5-minute free period at the end of the day. Signed, Year 5 and Mr. Brown. The new contract allows Mr. Brown to look for specific behaviours in his class. When the class is unruly, He reminds them of the contract and how many marbles are already in the jar. The extra 5 minutes playtime also has considerable impact by giving the class something short-term to work for. Although this is a fictional story, it is a story I've seen borne out in real life. By giving your pupils clear definable boundaries with clear definable goals and rewards, you can make a distinct difference in their behaviour. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to give a very quick... Actually, I'm going to jump forwards and read you this bit. Consistency is key. I cannot state clearly enough how important consistency is with regards to a behaviour contract. In case you hadn't already noticed, what we're attempting to create here is a form of rule-governed behaviour. As we mentioned in that section, which obviously you haven't heard, rule-governed behaviour only works when the rules are followed consistently by the parties outlining the rules. Therefore, if you promise reward for following a certain set of conditions, and those conditions are met, you better make sure that the reward is given. This is regardless of other events. If your class follows the rules, but a member or a couple of members do something else that is outside of the contract, you cannot take away the promised reward or you are in breach of the contract. In this case, the contract will lose its validity. For this reason, it is also important that you only put things in the contract that you know you can follow through with. If logistics interfere, as they often do, then agree a reasonable alternative. For example, if you cannot provide 5 minutes break time because of a sports event, then agree to provide this the following day or during the afternoon. If at any point you start to question this, then take a minute to reflect on how you as an adult might respond to the scenario. We expect to know what we need to do, and we expect to get the rewards promised to us. This is completely reasonable. It is important that we understand that children are just young adults who also have a very strong sense of justice. It is vital we respect this, or we will be unable to support behaviour change. Okay, so I'm going to finish that there. That was one of the chapters from my book, Supporting Behaviour with Science, Classroom Behaviour, which was published a couple of years ago now. Let me have a little look. Of course, it doesn't actually say. I'm pretty sure it was published in 2018. It was self-published. Looking through that, there are some things that I question with my own logic at the time. The big one in terms of my own development is thinking about whole class behaviour support systems and the impact that has on individuals. And I think if you're going to use a whole class behaviour support system, you need to consider whether or not everybody is going to be able to follow those rules, whether those rules are appropriate for everybody, and whether or not using that classroom behaviour contract, however you choose it, if you're using token economy, etc., is it going to isolate individual pupils in a negative way and create anxiety or negative emotions in those pupils? And I think we need to be really careful about how we use that. So you'll notice I didn't mention in the chapter any form of punishment system, and I stand by that. Especially, I don't like punishment, as you know, but especially using punishment for one person that affects a whole group is going to create anxiety and socially isolate that person. I think these things need to be really carefully considered. For example, one of the rules that we laid out in there was that listening meant looking at and not fiddling with, like not fiddling with pencils or fidget toys or anything. Actually, that's entirely wrong, because we could have pupils who find eye contact difficult. We could have pupils who have the need to fidget, and I'm actually quite surprised that I wrote that even a few years ago, because I'm a very, very fidgety person. If I'm doing an online course, I sit there and I doodle and I fidget. So we need to, if we're going to do a whole class behaviour support system, we need to be really careful that we do adapt and make sure it's supportive of everybody and get everybody's buy-in for the whole thing. So, yeah, okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Classroom Behaviour Solutions podcast. To make sure you don't miss future episodes, click the subscribe button and share this podcast with others. The more people that listen, the more help I can provide. To learn more and to find our social media pages, visit www.classroombehaviorsolutions.com. See you next time on the Classroom Behaviour Solutions podcast. Thank you.